The Touch of the Master's Hand. Christ's Miracles for Today by Charles L. Allen. Chapter 7. 38 years is a long time. The miracle of healing the man at the pool of Bethesda. John chapter 5, verses 1 to 9. In St. John's Gospel, there is a story about a man who had been sick for 38 years. I feel a real sympathy for that man. 38 years is a long time. We can imagine that when he first got sick, his friends came to see him, brought him flowers and food, and sought to cheer him up. If he had died, they would have grieved for him and attended his funeral. If he had gotten well, his friends would have congratulated him. But since he neither died nor got well, likely their visits became less frequent, and after a while there were no flowers in his room. As the weeks grew into months, and the months into years, it is likely the poor fellow was pretty much forgotten. Some of his friends moved away, others died. If he had any children, they grew up and made their own homes. Probably his wife died. And now, after 38 years of sickness, he was alone. But he refused to give up. In Jerusalem, down by the sheep market, there was a pool that had a strange healing power. The people believed that from time to time an angel would come and trouble the water. The first sick person to get into the water would then be healed. This man somehow got to the pool, and faithfully he watched for the times when the water was troubled. Each time he would make an effort to get in, but always somebody beat him to it. Surely the repeated disappointments must have been hard to bear. I guess the disturbance was just momentary or something, but the properties of the water would be about the same, really. I guess something could get released into the water. Do you want to be well? Other sick people around the pool had members of their family or friends to help them, but this poor fellow had nobody, so naturally they would beat him into the water. But he refused to give up. He stayed there and kept trying. One day Jesus saw him and asked, "Wilt thou be made whole?" That is, do you really want to get well? That is the most important question to ask any sick person. Many people really want to be sick. Leslie Weatherhead tells of a woman who was informed by her doctor that she had an incurable cancer, but later it was discovered that she did not have cancer at all. She refused to leave the hospital and was more upset by being told that she was well than that she was dying. She said, "I cannot bear the thought of facing life again." Change can be hard, even if it's for the better. When one reaches the point that life is hard to bear, being sick is one way of escape. I have known people who had not received the love and attention they deserved, and to get it, they got sick. Many sick people do not want to be well. We lose patience and treat with contempt that type of sickness. We use the term neurotic with a sneer. We have no sympathy with sickness when we decide it is merely in the person's mind. However, that is the sickest sickness of all, and the very hardest to cure. In this story, we see how Jesus cured it. Jesus asked, "Wilt thou be made whole?" Do you want to get well? That very question of Christ's implies that he believed the man was really sick. He did not say, "You are not sick," quite pretending, though this man's sickness was in his mind. Still, it was a real sickness, the worst sickness. Also, in the question of Christ's is implied the possibility of a cure. To have asked the man if he wanted to get well when there was no hope for him would have been cruelty. Clovis Chapel says it would be like saying to a hungry man at your door, "Would you like a good dinner?" and then slamming the door in his face, or saying to a drowning man, "Would you like to be saved?" and then leaving him in the water. But even Christ could not heal the man against his will. There is no limit to what God can and will do for us when we really want him to. First, we must want it. The man at the pool really wanted to be healed, but the conditions never were right for him. He could not quite make it to the water at the proper time. How many people have I known who were wasting their lives in waiting for the right conditions? We are going to do wonderful things. We are going to be the person we want to be sometime, but it never is quite the right time. Any time is the right time when our will is in harmony with God's will. Rise. So Jesus says to the man, "Rise." That was a strange command. This man was paralyzed. The one thing he could not do was rise. Christ always challenges us with what seems to us our impossibility. Sometimes what's impossible does need to be challenged to figure out what the actual limits are. That's a bit open of a statement, but and amazing it is what we can do in his power. In his presence of Christ, the man actually did rise. I've seen it happen many times. On the Sunday nights during the past several years, I have seen many more than 100,000 people kneel at the altar of the church and pray. I could name literally hundreds who have later told me of marvelous strength and changes in their lives that came to them there. By ourselves, our willpower is insufficient, but Christ is so great that in his presence, his will becomes our will. And we realize with St. Paul, I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. Is it Philippians 4:13? In Tennessee, recently, a man came to the hotel to see me. He said he wanted to ask my opinion of divine healing. I asked why he wanted to know. He told me that for years he had been sick. He carried pills in nearly every pocket. Then he began to pray and study his Bible, and he said, "Now I don't take any pills at all, and I feel good." I said, "My opinion of divine healing is not important to you. What really matters is that through the power of Christ, you have been made whole. How that power comes is not my greatest concern. The thing that counts is that when a man finds Christ, he has strength he never had before." Now, one of the things that you do find in the Bible is Jesus indicating that it wasn't about his name and his power and doctrine came from who sent him, aka God. Take up my bed. After Jesus told the paralyzed man at the pool of Bethesda to rise, he next told him, "Take up thy bed." That is, do everything possible to eliminate your temptation to fall back into your old way. Little by little, the life to which we become accustomed takes hold of us, and though we have longings and hopes of a better way, the ties of the old way are hard to break. This man had depended on his palate for so long that if he had left it within reach, its pull on him would have been stronger than the pull of the new life. When a person makes a new decision or resolution, one of the most strengthening things he can do is to tell somebody about it. I remember how my father used to preach for decisions, and then he would make what the old preachers used to call a proposition. They would say, if you will rise, if you will make this decision while we sing a hymn, come down and give me your hand. Preachers do not do that much now, but it had real value. A public profession is one way of taking up your bed. When you stand in the strength of Christ, don't think about the possibility of falling. We remember how Peter walked on the water as long as he kept looking at Christ. When he began to look at the winds and waves, he began to sink. Walk. After the paralyzed man stood and took up his bed, Jesus told him to walk. That is, begin some activity. I think the most redeeming institution on the face of this earth is the church. I believe so strongly in the worth of the church that I am investing my entire life in its service, doing what I can to get others to become part of the church. Yet the church has many critics. Some of the critics are outside the church. They do not worry me because I just stay away from those. The ones I do worry about are those whose names are on the roll, but it means nothing to them. Like the man at the pool, they complain that nobody will help them. They complain, the preacher never comes to see me. I go, but nobody shakes hands with me. The church is after my money. I don't like the music. Too many members of the church are hypocrites, and so forth. Again, it's not about the particular members in the building and all that, but the path. And why don't they use scripture verses, right, instead of hymns? But I've noticed that when the complaining fellow begins to walk on his own within the church, to support the church with his prayers, his presence, his gifts, and his service, he finds joy and strength therein. One is made whole only when he begins some worthwhile activity. The sickest people are usually those who have the least to do. One thing more later on, probably the next Sunday, Jesus found in the temple this man who had been healed. I like to believe he went to give thanks to God for his healing. Once Jesus healed 10 lepers, but only one came back to thank him. And in the expressing of his thanks, he received an even greater blessing. God has done wonderful things for us. Don't forget to come back to express your appreciation.